Hi there, I'm Kate McClellan, and I've been a professional wedding planner for over 20 years now. I started Planning Collective when I noticed that though most couples are super excited about getting engaged, they quickly feel overwhelmed and intimidated by the actual process of planning their weddings. If left unchecked, this can lead to massive burnout and the urge to scrap all your plans and just elope. While this is totally normal, you don't have to sacrifice your sanity for your dream wedding. In the Wedding Planning Collective podcast, I'm going to share the processes, tips, and tools that all engaged couples like you need to feel confident, supported, and excited about your wedding plans again. Let's get started. Hey there, before we get to the episode, I have a quick question for you. Have you been unsuccessfully trying to shake that feeling that you're forgetting something when it comes to your wedding? You've got the Knot app and you've downloaded countless other planning checklists, but you just can't get rid of that sneaking suspicion that there's something you don't know yet. It's a very common feeling when it comes to wedding planning. So much so that I decided to put together a free resource to help get rid of what I call FOWO, the fear of wedding oversight. Yes, it does include that 12-month task checklist, but that's just the start. In addition to the ultimate wedding planning checklist, my new Don't Forget list also includes a wedding vendor checklist, your shopping list, a packing list for the wedding weekend, and a complete wedding item setup list to make sure that you are truly not forgetting anything when it comes to your wedding. And you heard me right, this list is free for you to grab right now. Just head over to planningcollective.com/forgetting and it's all yours. That's planningcollective.com/FORGETTING, and let's get rid of that FOWO together. All right, let's get on to the episode. Hey guys, Kate here. Welcome back to another episode of the Wedding Planning Collective podcast. Today, we're going to switch things up a little bit, and we're going to do a little bit of a wedding Q&A. Last week, I asked brides and grooms to share their biggest wedding planning questions, the ones that keep popping up in either group chats or maybe 2 a.m. when you need to type it in really quick into your notes app. I'm going to give you my pro answers to those questions. We're going to talk about timelines, tipping, sparkler send-offs, and whether you actually need a backup to your backup. And even if you didn't send in a question, I guarantee that at least one of these will hit on something you've been wondering about, or you didn't even know you should be thinking about just yet. So let's get into it. Question number 1. Hey, Kate, I've seen so much conflicting info on timelines. How early should I start creating ours? And what do I actually need to include in it? You'll need to have the shell of your timeline before you can order or print your invitations because you'll need to include your ceremony and reception times. This is typically going to be about 4 to 6 months before the wedding. The next timeline deadline would be when you need to get some details out to your vendors. Most vendors aren't going to need a final version of the timeline until about a month out, but there are some details that you'll want to have solidified before that, right? These details can include whether you're doing a first look or photos before the ceremony, because you'll need to know how many hours you have to schedule your photographer for, hair and makeup start time so you can arrange breakfast and all the other details, and then what time is dinner going to be served so that you can kind of figure out the rest of the reception details. Outside of that, other details that you'll want to include are vendor arrival times, setup detail timing, wedding party and family arrival times. You'll want a more detailed hair and makeup schedule, as well as breakfast and lunch, and a full photo timeline, as well as your reception timeline. So that's going to be like your introductions, toasts, formal dances, those details. Now, getting more detailed than that without knowing the details of your actual wedding day is pretty tricky. And that's why we focus a lot of our time in the Planning Collective membership on talking about timelines. I have sample timelines in the templates that are included in the membership. And we actually have monthly timeline calls that are dedicated just to getting these specific details figured out. We actually have one coming up on July 3rd. So if you're not already in the membership, make sure that you join us for that. Question number 2, we're doing an outdoor wedding with just a tent, and someone just asked about our rain plan. Isn't the tent already the rain plan? Do we need a backup for the backup? Now, this one, of course, asks most of these questions. It's going to depend on a lot of your specific details. Tent is definitely a form of a backup, but it's not always going to be enough depending on what Mother Nature throws your way the week of your wedding. Most importantly, please do not skip on adding the sidewalls for your tent at the very beginning. I know a lot of couples are tempted to skip this because it usually costs more to add those in. And in an ideal world, you won't need them. The problem is, and a lot of people aren't aware of this, many rental companies don't own enough sidewalls for all of their tents. So the week of the wedding, if the forecast isn't looking great, believe that every person that has rented a tent from that company is now calling them to add in those sidewalls. And if they only have a certain amount, then they're going to run out. If your budget allows, reserve them from the very beginning. That doesn't mean you have to put them up, but it's like an insurance policy. The other component about sidewalls you want to think about is even if your forecast for your wedding day is gorgeous, we have a tent going up later on today. Forecast for the wedding day on Friday looks like it's going to be pretty good. However, between today, it's Tuesday, and Friday, we're going to get some rain. Tomorrow night, we're going to get some rain. But that tent is already going to be up. We'll have the sidewalls up. So the ground under the tent will not be as soaking wet because of Wednesday night or Thursday's rain. So sidewalls, even if you don't need them on the wedding day, they can really help in those couple of days between. And if you do need them on the wedding day, you want to have them already ordered. A tip to help you potentially save is ask the company you're working with if they have enough sidewalls. Every company is going to be a bit different. If the one you're working with does have enough sidewalls, or maybe they didn't charge you extra for them, again, most companies do, but some don't, then you know that you can wait to add them on so you're not paying for something that you don't necessarily need. But again, think of it like insurance. We all hope we don't need our car insurance. We hope we don't need to use more than our health insurance than just like preventative stuff, right? But if we need it, oh my gosh, are we so happy that it's there? In addition to having those sidewalls, most of our tent or outdoor weddings will have a component that is outside of that tent, right? Like the ceremony or a cocktail hour. Maybe it's even just getting the guests to and from the different locations. So, are we talking about like parking being far away, or do they have to go outside of the tent to use the restroom? Whatever it might be. So you want to have a plan in place for those different times that guests won't be under the direct tent. Sometimes that means ordering a pop up tent just in case they need to get from point A to point B to help kind of cover that pathway. Some rental companies have actual tents that are meant to be walkways. Of course, that gets a little bit pricier, but depending on your venue and your budget, that could be an option. At the very least, I highly recommend you order bulk umbrellas. As I'm recording this, it's actually Amazon Prime Day, and that is a perfect thing to snag on Prime Day. Get those bulk umbrellas. Hopefully, you don't need them. Pick the Prime Day that's closest to your wedding, Black Friday, whatever sale event is closest to your wedding. Stock up on bulk umbrellas, not just for the guests to get from point A to point B, but think about what you need also for photos. So, grabbing those clear umbrellas, just get a couple of them. Big black golf umbrellas, you don't necessarily need those because they're more expensive. You don't need those for your guests, but those are great for wedding party photos. So if it is not like a washout and you still want to take photos on your wedding day, those will totally save you to have those. So stock up on those items. Now, keep them in the boxes, don't open them up. If you get a perfect weather forecast, return them, right? You don't need to use them. Same with fans. If it's going to be a hot day, you can order some pedestal fans. If you don't need them, return them. If you do, again, it's like that insurance policy. If you have them and you don't need them, at least you had them, right? But if you do need them, it could be a huge game changer. And finally, make sure to talk to your vendors and ask them what they will need in case of bad weather. Power access, photo locations, catering prep areas, all of that may look very different if you have bad weather coming. And again, hopefully you don't need to use any of this. But in the moment, if you haven't thought about it, it's going to be a lot more pressure and stress on you to deal with it if you haven't thought through all of those things. So, again, when it comes to backyard weddings, tented weddings, anything that is outside, especially if you're in a state like Michigan where the weather can be a bit unpredictable. If you're in California and you see rain like a couple times a year, that's a bit different. But if you are in a state where weather is very unpredictable, you want to think through these things again as an insurance policy. Hopefully, it's just kind of, I don't want to say wasted time, but if you do need it, you're going to be so grateful that you already have this plan in place so that you know what's going to happen and it doesn't add stress to the week of your wedding. Question number 3, quick logistics question. How much time should I plan between the ceremony and the reception? We're doing everything at the same venue, but I want to make sure that it's not an awkward downtime. Now, for this one, I could interpret this question two different ways depending on your actual details. So I'm going to give a couple different answers. So, if by reception you mean the start of the cocktail hour, I highly recommend that you have it scheduled immediately following the ceremony or give a significant gap of 2 to 4 hours so the guests have time to either go back to their room, go home, do something in that time frame. If your ceremony ends before the bar or cocktail hour is open or ready to start, but there's not enough time for them to go and do anything else, it's going to be really awkward and frustrating for the guests to just kind of stand and wait around. Now, if by reception you mean when the guests actually take their seats, so after cocktail hour, the sweet spot is really 45 to 75 minutes within somewhere within that time frame. If your cocktail hour is in the same room as your reception, keep it on the shorter side because the guests are already going to be finding their seats and they'll be sitting down on their own. But if they need to move from one location or one room to another, you need to plan for time for them to actually move to that location. I will say, as a planner, one of the most frustrating times of the day for us, and I know other planners listening can definitely relate to this, is when we're trying to move guests from cocktail hour into the reception space. Again, whether it's just another room or a fully different location, we're going around, oh, we're ready to start dinner. Please take your seats. We're kind of trying to do it in a nice way. I even bought a little thing on an Amazon Prime Day, little chimes to walk around and let people know that it's time to move on to the next phase of the reception. They look at us, they smile, say thank you, and then they keep talking. So it might seem silly, but you really want to plan for like 15 to maybe even 30 minutes of time getting people to move from one space to the other, depending, of course, on how far they're going and the number of guests that you have. So if you have like 200 plus, it's going to take quite a bit of time for us to move people from one place to the other. Again, I know it's one of those things that sounds silly that should take 5 minutes. You open the doors, people go through them, and they take their seats. But once the bar is open, people are in mid conversation, and it is a little bit it is a lot challenging to get people to actually move into the reception space. So make sure that you are allowing a proper amount of time in there. I say 75 minutes is kind of the max time you want for a cocktail hour, because if your cocktail hour is too long, the guests are going to get antsy. If you absolutely have to have a longer cocktail hour because of photos or whatever reason it might be, make sure that you have plenty of food and drinks for that amount of time. The typical cocktail hour is set for 60 minutes. So that's the amount of food that the caterer and bar staff are going to be ready for. And if you have it for a longer time and you run out of food, the guests are going to start getting really impatient. Generally speaking, though, I think 60 minutes is the sweet spot for the average cocktail hour. Now, one final scenario I do want to cover, because you said that your venue is the same for the reception and the ceremony. If you mean the literal same venue, so there needs to be a room flip, so it's the same space that you're using for the ceremony, and then guests go somewhere else for the reception. I'm sorry, guests go somewhere else for a cocktail hour while the staff flip the room. Then you need to talk to your vendors and those that are involved in the flip on how much time they need. So it really depends on the logistics of your space and what they need to do. Most venues that do a flip will have the tables set already and they just need to move them into place. But if you fully need to set, then you're going to need a little bit more time. So if that's what we're talking about, then make sure you are talking specifically to your vendors that are doing the decor and actually managing the flip, and they'll let you know how much time they need. Question number 4. We're planning on doing a first look, but I am totally overwhelmed with planning the rest of the photos. How do couples normally organize this so they're not feeling rushed or stressed? Okay, this is another one, and I hate to keep saying this, but it really depends on a lot of your details. Most importantly, though, work with your photographer. They are going to know exactly what you need to do, or location wise, are we talking about needing to go to different places and all of that? Those are some of the details that, again, it will depend on what your timeline is. So, again, most importantly, work with your photographer. Generally speaking, though, plan for at least 2 hours pre ceremony if you're doing that first look. Add a little bit more time to that if you're going to other locations. So if you're doing a first look in one spot, then going other places to take pictures, you might need a little bit more than that 2 hours. To make the most of your time, list out your groups of family, couples, wedding, college friends, any groups that you want pictures of. Make sure that you are listing those out in advance so that your photographer can check through all of it. Now, I talk about this in more detail in the episode about the worksheets. So pre-wedding worksheets. I don't have that episode number on me right now, but you can grab the in our free guide. So planningcollective.com/free guides. You can get the 4 wedding worksheets, and there is a worksheet that talks about setting up your photo list. So make sure you have that in advance. And I also talk about some other tips to help family photos go a little bit smoother. That's what the episode is on, family photos. So make sure to find that. The other really important part about these photo sessions is that you're padding the timeline with a little bit of buffer time. I find that this area, specifically with timelines, can be really easy to underestimate how much time you need. For example, when brides are getting dressed, I always make sure that at bare minimum, we put 30 minutes in for the bride getting dressed. My comfort zone is more 45 to 60 minutes of the bride getting dressed. And usually, when we're first doing that, it sounds ridiculous, right? It doesn't take you 45 minutes to put a dress on. On your wedding day, it will. And I should say, on your wedding day, it might, because really it's not just the act of putting the dress on, right? That we're accounting for in that timeline. It's from the moment you say, "Okay, I'm ready to go. I'm ready to get dressed. Hair and makeup is done. You've got all your row pictures. You're ready to go." From that moment to when you are dressed, jewelry is on, they've got you all tied up in the back, your mom's helped you zip, you've got the photos of them putting your jewelry on, helping you with the veil. All of that needs to be within that time frame. So if you literally are putting your dress on, there's no photographer, you're not doing any of those pictures of you getting dressed, then yeah, maybe 10, 15 minutes could be realistic. But most brides are going to want photos throughout that time frame. If you want pictures with you and your mom, or you and your girls once you're dressed, that is usually included in that time frame. So what I don't want to see is 12:30 bride puts on dress, 12:15 girls leave the hotel room to get on the shuttle. That is certainly not realistic, right? So just make sure that you have that buffer time built in for certain things. I am a big proponent, and this might sound odd as a planner, I am a big proponent of not doing your timeline down to the minute. So you're not going to be able to predict when you need to go to the bathroom or when you need to touch up your makeup. Of course, you can add some of those things in there, but I would much rather say, let's do a 45-minute putting on the dress session rather than saying 12:30 bride puts on the dress, 12:35 bride's mother zips up the dress, 12:40 bride's sister helps her put on her shoes and jewelry, 12:50 bridesmaid shot of putting on the veil. We will typically just kind of group all of that together and give you that longer period of time, because doing it so itemized, in my opinion, is just simply not realistic. And once you get off your timeline for the day, it can just be a domino effect. So making sure that you have that buffer time built in is really going to be crucial for that day. Now, again, a lot of this is going to depend on your specific details and where you're going for photos. Is everything in the same venue? All of that. So, just like I mentioned in our first question, make sure that you're joining one of our timeline chats that's in the membership. That's where I can ask you those specific questions and give you direct answers. So, if you have X, Y, and Z places to go to, how far is that? Generally speaking, I can help ask more specific questions that help me give you a specific answer to this question. Question number 5. I feel like I should know this, but tipping is confusing me. Who do I tip, how much, and when do I hand it out? Now, this is a really common question. I've covered it in several different episodes in the past, most recently, episode 125, which is making me think that I misspoke about one of the other episodes earlier. So check out in the show notes. I'll make sure to link all the episodes that I've mentioned and the different resources that we talk about throughout these questions. Usually I have a more scripted podcast to give you, but since I'm just answering questions, I'm kind of going off the cuff here a little bit. But again, I'll make sure to link all of the resources that we talk about in the show notes, where we have another episode talking specifically about tipping, and then I also have a blog post that goes over the different categories and all of that. But to give you a kind of quick response to this, I know that a lot of us are really just kind of tired of the tipping culture that's happening here in the States. It is getting a little bit out of hand. I think we've all had the moment where we've been at like a self checkout, or we've not even interacted with a human and you're still asked for a tip on some kind of kiosk, right? But you will likely have some vendors on your team where it is expected, if not required, like written into your contract, that you will have to tip. So it is something that you need to think about. The vendors that are often either expected or required a gratuity are going to be hair and makeup, catering and bar staff, if you have live musicians, and of course, transportation. So those are common to have it either written into their contract or have an expectation of a gratuity. Other than that, the general rule of thumb is if your vendor is the business owner, so if your photographer owns the business, it's less expected to tip them than if it was a photographer working for another company. Now, I certainly don't want to talk anybody out of getting a tip. And if it is within your budget and the person went above and beyond for you, they will certainly be grateful for it. Taking a look at your vendor list, look through who, again, is working for somebody else and who has really helped you throughout the process. In that past episode, I also talk about some really good alternatives to cash gratuities, as well as the amount that you should or could be tipping, because it doesn't always follow that 15 to 20% that we're used to in the rest of the hospitality industry. Now, when it comes to giving the tips out, if it is required, you're going to want to have a plan for someone trusted, whether it's your planner, someone in your wedding party, your parents. You're going to want to have a plan for them to be able to get those vendors that gratuity before the end of the wedding. If it is optional, or if it is something maybe on your wedding day, somebody just goes so above and beyond to help you out and you want to show your appreciation, you can always tip them after. And again, a gratuity doesn't necessarily have to be in the form of cash. So listen to that episode and I'll talk about how you can show your appreciation with reviews, referrals, and all of that in lieu of a cash tip. Question number 6. We're sending our invite soon. When do we actually have to give the final guest count to our venue and caterer? Okay, now before I answer this question, I want to clarify that I am going to answer this specifically talking about the states. More specifically, I'm in Michigan in the Detroit area. You guys, I'm not even exaggerating when I say people have been arguing in the comment section of a reel I posted last month about this topic. And much of it is because what is common in one country or one area might not be the norm in others. It's wild. Make sure you go check it out. The cover image says invitation mistake. And then I also have an updated one to clarify what people are fighting about. The internet is wild, you guys. People can get so mean over just one little comment. And because I don't know where the person who sent this question in is from, I'm going to give the general answer and I'm going to give like a more specific answer again that pertains to here in the States, specifically where we're located in Michigan, Detroit area. But I think when we talk about specifics, from what I've seen, it is pretty common as the norm in the States. Generally speaking, you are going to have to get guest RSVPs, so guest responses, back from your guests 2 weeks or so before you need to give the vendors your final count. And that's the part that is different in different areas, when the vendors need that final count. Again, in my 20 plus years of experience here in the States, most vendors that need a final count, so caterers, rental companies, those that are based on your number of guests, will need the final count 10 to 14 days before the wedding. And that's where this can really differ. In the UK, I'll see some vendors saying that they need it 6 months in advance. To me, I can't even imagine trying to give a vendor a count 6 months in advance and expect it to be accurate as the wedding gets closer. But again, it just depends on what the norm is in your area. So again, here it's 10 to 14 days before. So with that in mind, you're going to want to have your RSVP due date set 3 to 4 weeks before the wedding. People, that might seem really late. In that reel, I actually talk about why you don't want to set your RSVP date earlier. I even said in the comments, I get it. As a planner, I wish from day one we could know exactly how many guests are going to be at the wedding so we could plan things accordingly. But again, with 20 years of experience, I know the expectations and what we need here in the States, it has to be a little bit closer to the wedding. Your vendors are all super familiar with waiting until knowing that final count until that 10 to 14 days out. Again, the most important takeaway here is to determine your date, your RSVP due date. Talk to your vendors that need a final count of guests, and then add about 1 to 2 weeks to that date that they need their final count. And that's when you should be asking the guests to respond. Question number 7, is there a trick to organizing all the vendor arrival times? I don't want 10 people texting me on the morning of the wedding asking where to go and when to be there. Okay. I mean, the biggest thing I can say is hire a planner. There really is no substitution for having an experienced professional watching out for you on the day of your wedding so that you can just simply get your hair and makeup done and enjoy the day. But I understand that's not going to be within everybody's budget. If it is within your budget, I highly recommend you find an experienced planner, at least for what's commonly called day of coordination, month of coordination, or event day management. I'm going to save the argument about the title of what it's called, but many planners will have a service that is intended not to help you with the planning of the event, but with the execution of it. So you'll find some planners don't call it day of coordination, but it's essentially the same thing. Big red flag is if a professional vendor tells you that they will literally just show up that day and help you with everything. That's a red flag. A real experienced planner is going to know that they need at minimum a month of working with you and your other vendors to make sure that they're truly saving you from all of those questions the day of. If someone tells you, nope, I just show up and I handle everything, what's going to happen is instead of 10 different people coming at you with all of these questions, you're going to have that planner coming to you with all of those same questions because they haven't been able to do the prep work of knowing what you want for your wedding day. So that is essentially where the argument of there's no such thing as day of coordination. I personally still call that service day of coordination because that's what most people know it as. But we start 2 months before the wedding, at least 2 months before the wedding to help our couples. So it really is super deceiving, that name, but making sure that you have someone there that knows what they're doing and talks to you through the planning process, doesn't just show up that day, that's ultimately the best way that you can ensure everything will run smoothly and no one's bothering you with any questions. If a planner is not in your budget, that's absolutely fine. I totally get it. Make sure that you're creating a master timeline, not just of where you and your wedding party and everybody needs to be, but all of the setup, delivery, and rental items. List everything out. Make sure that you are including everything in this document and send it to every person you can think of that's going to be involved in that. If this is rental companies and other professional decor companies and all that, make sure they have it. If you're having family or friends that are helping you with the setup process, make sure they all have access to this master timeline so that they can review it ahead of time. Most importantly, ask you any questions they have before the wedding. In this document, you want to include not just arrival, setup, and teardown times and details, but share directions, parking instructions, venue layouts. Make sure all of those details are also included in it because I find that those are typically the areas that people are calling you last minute with those questions. Where do we park after I unload? Is there a validation? All of those questions are the ones that seem small, but on your wedding day, you don't want to have, like you said, 10 different calls coming in. And of course, make sure that in that document, you are also giving the contact information for someone on the wedding day that is not you. Ideally, it's not going to be a bridesmaid or your parents or someone else that's going to be with you and you want to be present in the moment. But depending on your details, it may end up needing to be one of those people. Either way, just make sure it's not you. Make sure it is someone that is not you, that is designated, has all of this information, and you're able to review this with them ahead of time so that you can get the questions answered in advance of the wedding and they're not calling you the day of. Question number 8. Our venue is basically a blank slate. So we're bringing in everything. What's the best way to keep track of what we need and when everything is arriving? Okay, so this question is basically like a hybrid of the previous episode, a backyard wedding, and the previous question. So, again, my first answer to this is going to be hire a planner. Blank slate or unique venues often come with their own quirks, and having a professional, again, experienced professional that can go in and be on your side and anticipate those things in advance of the wedding is kind of like those sidewalls. It's like having an insurance policy to make sure that you're not missing anything. So again, going back to the last question, that definitely all of that pertains to this question. And also make sure that you're checking out the previous episode 128. Grab the backyard guide at planningcollective.com/free guides. You're probably thinking, well, my wedding's not in a backyard, so why do I need that guide? There are so many similarities between a backyard wedding and what we call either a blank slate venue or a unique venue. There's a farmer's market venue just up the road here from me in Royal Oak, and I love it as a venue, but you literally are just renting the shell of the farmer's market. So it is very similar to having a tent in your backyard where you need to bring everything in. It's actually a little bit trickier because a backyard, you have like the full week to be able to slowly bring in all the vendors and details. But a blank slate venue, you often only have for a limited amount of time. So that guide is really going to walk you through the checklist of what you need to consider in a unique space. And again, even if you're not in a backyard setting, it will help you with the checklist of things you need to bring in to blank slate venues. So it's a great resource for you to have on hand throughout the planning process. In addition to that, and everything that we listed in the previous question, make sure that you're confirming delivery and setup windows, when you have access to the space, when everybody has to be out of the space, and designate who is responsible for what. Is the rental company bringing the chairs and tables, but they're just leaving them stacked and not actually setting them to your floor plan? You need to know who is actually going to set up those tables, who's going to put the chairs out. Not all rental companies will do that in what they've included. Most of the time, you'll have to pay a little bit more per table or chair for them to staff that actual setup. It's all about getting these details answered before the day. You don't want that day to come and all of a sudden you've got 150 stacked chairs and no one to help set them up. Question number 9, how far out should we start confirming things with our vendors? Like what's the standard timeline for final walkthroughs, confirming details, etc. This is a common question that I see posted, and it's going to depend on each vendor. So a lot of couples are surprised. They'll book their photographer, they'll book their florist or rental companies, and then from booking till like 2 months before the wedding, they might not hear anything from them. That is not, generally speaking, that is not anything to be concerned about. Well, it's good for your vendors to check in every once in a while. It's not always going to be guaranteed. So check with your vendors and ask what their process is for those that are involved in the planning process. So if you're not talking about like tastings and stuff like that, they probably won't pick up the actual planning of your timeline and the logistical details until 1 to 2 months before your wedding. For those that you're going to need to work with throughout the process, obviously a planner you're going to be in touch with a lot more often. Your venue you'll likely be in contact with to do either tastings or set up that walkthrough. But ultimately, ask each vendor what is the either expectation or what is their process for you getting them those details. And then you'll know when you need to reach out to them, or you'll know if you haven't heard from your photographer in a few months, is that a concern? Likely it's not. Once you get around 4 or 5 months out, I have what I call my wedding workbook meeting. And that is where we do like a brain dump of everything wedding related. That's also included in the membership. And I prompt you through everything. It's based on the workbook that I use for my day of wedding clients. And the intention for that is when I'm going through all these questions, it's what catches me up on the wedding plans, but it's also what helps us figure out what has either been missed or not addressed yet. So that is super helpful in going through not just like the timeline, but we also go through wedding worksheets, checklists, and things to make sure that everything has been figured out. So, short answer, talk to your vendors about when they need information and they'll help you with figuring out when to set up those final meetings. Longer answer, join us in the membership where we can walk through the full like brain dump of everything wedding related. I love those meetings because without fail, after every meeting, I'll have someone say, like, oh my God, there were so many things I hadn't thought of, or I feel so much better after going through everything in one setting, making sure it all feels cohesive. Okay, final question. Question number 10. We really want to do a sparkler send off, but our photographer leaves before the end of the reception. Is it weird to fake it earlier in the night? Now, this might be a surprise answer, maybe not. It is totally normal to stage these earlier. I would say 90% of the sparkler exits that you see photos of are probably done earlier in the night. You just want to make sure that it's after the sun has set and about 20 to 30 minutes before the photographer leaves. Talk to your planner or your venue about where you can use the sparklers. Some will have a no open flame policy, even for something like sparklers. And then your DJ can also help coordinate how to rally the guests together to make sure that you can get this photo moment. So talk to your photographer, your DJ, and the venue, and they'll help you determine when is the best time for you to do this that evening. And if you've got more planning questions buzzing around in your head after this episode, don't worry, you are not alone. Wedding planning is certainly a lot, but you don't have to figure it all out on your own. If you want extra support, we go through questions like these every other week in the Wedding Planning Collective membership. We have what I call office hours, but the difference is you can talk to me and ask other questions. So it really is a great way for me to get more context behind these questions to give you more specific answers. Check out the resources that I'm going to include here below that are at planningcollective.com and planningcollective.com/free guides to give you some of those links. And as always, if this episode helped you out, I would be forever grateful if you could rate, review, and subscribe. It helps more couples find the planning help that they need, and it keeps the free tips coming your way each week. Thank you so much for listening, and I will see you in the next episode.